What's going on, everybody? I'm Patrick from POWLAX, and this video is an excerpt from the two-man game video. And in this section, we're going to be talking about all of the different types of two-man games. Now in this portion of the video, we're going to move relatively fast. We're going to talk about all of the different two-man games that we have that we can create. And one of the things we're going to talk about as we go through all these two-man games is how they relate to the pick itself. So the first one we have is our give and go or a cut. And the give and go can be taught right as players are hitting like end of 8 and then 9 years old, because that's when their brains start to understand the idea of another player having an impact on the game. So within our give and go and our cut, it's relatively simple. If M2 passes the ball down to A2, one of the things that happens often is that DM1 is actually going to just watch the ball. And that is going to give M2 the ability to maybe make a cut and then cut into the middle. A2 can then pass right back to him. And now M2 is going to be in on goal. And so one of the really cool things about give and goes is that as you are teaching them, especially to these 9-year-olds, is you can use very good terminology, which is pass and cut. And as you are saying cut, the player who is 9 is going to look at that and think, someone is cutting, I should look into them. Whereas the player who is 7 isn't really even going to hear you. Like some 8-year-olds are able to do it too, but the idea of giving them useful verbiage of exactly what they're supposed to do is how we want to train that give and go or that cut. One last thing about the give and go after I'd already erased this is that the give and go is something that we can easily use within the picking idea, because as we are passing the ball and then moving to set the pick, if our defenseman starts to show off of us, we're just going to cut right through, and that is more of a give and go than you would say slipping a pick if you're not moving out to set the pick yet. In this clip, we see an interception in transition, and as the players are running in, this player steps away, passes the ball up to the top of the box, and as he does that, his defenseman turns towards the ball, so he cuts behind him, receives a pass right back, and then scores. This is about as simple as a give and go can get. The key here is the fact that we are always probing, and if our defenseman does not pay attention, we will make them pay by cutting off ball. Next, we have the mirror, and a mirror is something that players can also learn around 9 or 10 because it gives them a place to move that reflects the other player. Now, the reason why we'd want to use a mirror in a two-man game scenario is because we already like this matchup. So if we already like this matchup, we don't want to bring this defenseman to the matchup. Instead, what we want to do is we want to isolate this defenseman here, have him beat him, either get in on goal and score or draw a slide from this defenseman. So what we're kind of doing is we're actually baiting this defenseman into a slide. So the way the mirror works is A2 is basically going to move opposite about this point from the dodge. So as M2 dodges, let's say he comes down the alley. If he goes down the alley, A2 is going to mirror to the top. Now, if DM1 gets beat, D2 is going to slide, and now we have an easy pass to A2 that is, he's going to get a rotation from other players, but it's a very easy read for M2 to see the crease defenseman who is closer than any of the other defensemen on the other side and read the pass back, which is going to force the rotation. Now, if M2 decides to roll back over the top, that's going to force A2 to alter his route and get to the wing on the right side as well. So regardless of how the dodge happens, the off-ball player must react and then present themselves as an option opposite the ball. For our mirror examples, we are going to show 2 examples from the same game as Penn played Yale in the NCAA quarterfinals. In our first example, Penn sets up a dodge from top left and sweeps across the top. Notice how the crease midfielder awaits which direction the ball carrier is going to go and then pops out to the wing as he sees the sweep to the top. The defenseman slides, he accepts the feed, and he buries the shot. Our next example is of a wing dodge and a mirror, but this example is from more of the flow of Penn's offense, not them setting up an initial dodge. As this player catches the ball on the wing, he hitches, rolls back, walks the dog, and engages his defenseman as the player on the crease mirrors to the top. This baits the defenseman to slide, the ball carrier steps away, passes to the player who mirrored, and he buries it once again. This is definitely one of my favorite plays from 2019. Late in the game, super intense, a little bit of trash talk going with it. You already plan practice, you already run the drills. You already think about what worked and what didn't. Now it all lives in one place and makes you wildly more efficient with the POWLAX Confidence Coaching Kit. In the planner, start from scratch or load in one of my templates. You can add your own drills or use mine and filter them by what you want to build. So offense, defense, rides, clears, transition. Tap the tag you need and see only the drills that build that part of your game. Click the study button on a drill to see the video, diagram, and images. If you like it, tap it and add it to your plan. Out of order, just drag it where you want it. Add notes for what you want to do in each drill and print the plan or run it from your phone. Both work. From the app, you can use the live practice view to stay on time and reference the next drill in a tap. So you're never searching for what you need and your eyes stay up during practice. After practice, confirm that you ran it and add quick notes or more detail on how each individual drill went. Next time you're planning practice, you can review and reuse old plans, and since the drill notes show up in the planner, you always remember how the drill went during the last practice, so you're always building and never backtracking. If you want POWLAX to handle the organizing so you can focus on coaching, get the Confidence Coaching Kit today. And when you're ready to get your whole staff on the same page, Team HQ leadership takes it further. All your coaches share the same planner and language. The players show up inside the run practice view, and you can track players with notes and workouts all from one place. Players get the Skills Academy with leaderboards and simple workouts easy enough for a 7-year-old to do on their own. Confidence Coaching Kit locks in the coaches loop. Team HQ leadership unites your staff and opens the door for all your players to grow with you. Now, the next 3 two-man games that we have all involve 2 players that are going to stay on the perimeter of the field until one of them might turn the corner or then cut afterwards. But for the most part, they're going to stay on the edge of the field. And we're going to pair up the first 2 because within the first 2, the ball carrier and the off-ball player are both going to switch places. So in these next 2 with shallow cuts and overlaps, these 2 players are going to switch places. And the main thing that's going to decipher one of these from the other is whether the off-ball player is closer to the goal or farther away from the goal. So in a carry shallow cut, which a carry basically is just the dodge, as M3 dodges down the alley, A3 is going to move under him and replace him. And the reason why the shallow cut is so important to the development of players is because it's so simple to put in. So if you've watched my 3v2 or 3v0s, 3v2s, 3v3s videos, shallow cuts are very easy because it replaces and it shows spacing and how to keep a 3-man triangle the same. And so another reason why it's very important to utilize is because A3 moving underneath is going to put this defenseman in a position where he can't play the shallow cut as well as the ball carrier. So he may have to show in this position. Now, the overlap is different because as M2 dodges, A2 is actually going to come kind of inside and then out around him. And what that does is that brings this defenseman to the ball carrier where he is in a position that he can play the ball as well as play his player who is outside of him. So if D2 doubles the ball here, he's also in a good off-ball position inside of A2 who's on the outside of him. That's why, for the most part, we really want to have players understand the idea of shallow cutting first, because you want to keep your defenseman away from the ball carrier. Now, the one thing that I really want to point out about this shallow cut idea is how much more difficult it is to cover a shallow cut than it is to cover a pick that is set from the outside of the field, which we'll get into more when we talk about picking. But so as A3 is moving towards M3, he does have the option to move in to set a pick, but DM2 can probably see him in his peripheral vision, and we really don't want to start picking that way. Is it possible? Sure. Can it make the defense think? Sure. But what's really difficult to do if these defensemen don't communicate correctly is it's extremely difficult for DM2 to recover or switch to A3 if A3 is moving back upfield pretty quickly. So instead of stopping, which will allow if D3 decides to switch, and DM2 has to switch to A3, if he just continues to kind of run through and then cut, the odds of DM2 being able to stop his momentum because of the switch and then find A3 is very tough. So defensively, we actually want to slide to this instead of have a switch, because it's very difficult for that player to be running full speed with one player and then about face and catch another player who's moving fast in the opposite direction. Now, the final thing with shallow cuts and overlaps is we want to incorporate a skill into both of these. So just like in the pick, as a shallow cut is happening, we always want M3 to look back at the shallow cut. So as we talked about earlier, this defenseman D3, he's going to kind of show to deter the dodge that's going to turn the corner. And as he shows, if this offensive player thinks that they can beat this defensive player, if he kind of steps away and looks back towards A3, D3 is going to stay with the shallow cut, which is going to open up a lane for him to get in on goal. And these look back fakes, you don't have to throw a fake. All you have to do is kind of step away, turn and look, and that's going to keep the defenseman out of the lane, which will give him space to come in. Our shallow cut example happens with a dodge from top center around a player who is top right. As the player dodges to his left, the player top right shallow cuts underneath him to get out of his way and replace him up top. This defenseman here should be showing towards the ball and should be in a slide position because he's the near man. They are in an open set. There's no one else that can actually help. He doesn't end up helping, which is what gives the player space down the alley to shoot on the run and score. Now, had this defenseman slid, it would have been a very easy read to step away, roll back, and pass back and cause the defense to rotate. Now, for the overlap, we have a wholly different skill, and that skill is a flip or a fake flip. So as these two cross, M2 is going to have his stick in his outside hand. It doesn't really matter if A2 has it inside or outside. For the most part, he's probably going to have it outside, but as M2 and them cross, M2 is going to either flip the ball up to A2 or fake the flip. And what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that D2 can't cheat and double this, because he has to be respectful of A2 who may catch the ball. It also may allow M2 to create space underneath D2, because if he fakes the flip and D2 kind of jumps towards this ball, he can now get underneath and get there. But so having this flip or fake flip decision will make the defense think, which will then make them slower. And now we are, playing with another little decision-making idea. To go over our overlaps, we're going to use 4 clips. In our first clip, this player dodges down the alley, the overlap comes. And the reason I wanted to use this clip is to show that as you are overlapping and as you are throwing the flip should be thrown so that the player who is going to be catching it catches it at head height by moving through the flip, not by accepting it by their hips like a lot of younger players like to do. This will allow the players to move fast towards each other. In our next clip, you will see flips executed the same way and back and forth in kind of a consistent overlap pattern where we'll do a flip on one side, then a flip on the other side. This style of offense is often called a weave, and it can actually be done one other way. The other way a weave is done is by actually passing the ball down and using a pass down, pick down tactic. Now, some people think that this is an overlap, and it may be in some sense, but I like to think of it more as a pass down, pick down rather than an overlap, because an overlap to me signifies that a player is coming over the ball carrier, not accepting the ball and then moving over an off-ball player. Our final 2 clips are of fake flips during an overlap. In our first clip, we get a sweep across the top, and as this player overlaps, we get a fake flip that allows the ball carrier to turn the corner, getting inside on goal and scoring. Now, our final clip is an overtime goal by Joel Tinney. Notice how he sweeps across the top. As he sends his fake flip, it confuses all of the defensemen. He shoots, and Hopkins wins in overtime. If this is a lot to remember, I put the core concepts and diagrams into a printable playbook that you can get for free when you create a free account on the POWLAX app. You can study it, mark it up, and rewatch all of the POWLAX videos on the new resources page. Watch the rest of this lesson, then go to the resources page to download it. The final 2-man game that we have with the players staying on the perimeter is a fade. And what a fade does is it basically creates space for a dodger to turn the corner to get into the middle of the field. And so as M2 dodges, we're going to have him sweep across the top, and this is a really great spot for a fade. And as he's trying to turn the corner to get to the middle of the field, M3 is going to backpedal and create space while staying on this the edge of dangerous space. And so as he fades, what he's doing is he's putting this defenseman in a very awkward spot. Now, for the most part, what a defense is going to try and do is keep players down the alley and slide from the crease, because that is something that a lot of teams train. It's what they expect. Now, if you get beat over the top, you don't want a player sliding upfield. So what ends up happening, and this happens in the Q set, the Duke Fade and Follow set, is what you're going to do as you sweep to the middle is If these players fade instead of shallow cut underneath, you are going to put them in an adjacent slide position. So as DM2 kind of stays with M3, he's going to be in this position where he may have to go so that M2 can't turn the corner, get inside, and score. And so M3, he's going to be backpedaling with his stick up in a shooting position, basically a triple threat or a double threat position where he's ready to catch the ball and either shoot, pass, or dodge. And so M2 is manipulating DM2 because he may have to go. And so another thing that M2 can do here is he can actually fake to make DM2 think the pass is going to go to M3, which will give him space to get into the middle. And so the key to fading is that you have to be ready to catch the ball. You've got to be on the edge of dangerous space so that you are ready to shoot, dodge, or pass from there. And that as this player is trying to turn the corner, he does get into the middle so that this adjacent player may have to dodge it. If both players stay on the exterior of the field where they're not in a dangerous spot, it's not going to create an advantage that we are going to be able to utilize. We're going to show the fade in 3 clips. In our first clip, we're going to watch number 22 here as this player sweeps across the top and then as the player from X dodges up the right hash. Notice how as he fades, his defenseman has this adjacent slide possibility where if this player turns the corner, he has to slide, which then leaves him wide open on the wing. As the ball hits X and the player dodges up the right side, he does the exact same motion, fading up the wing, staying dangerous, and putting his defenseman in this difficult situation once again. The ball is passed up to him, he finds a player inside, and they score. In this next clip, we're going to see what happens when a defenseman doesn't slide or doesn't slide in time. As this player dodges from top center, he dodges to his left and turns the corner well, which doesn't give the adjacent defenseman enough time to slide to make contact, and the ball carrier turns the corner, shoots, and scores. Had the ball carrier not taken this shot, look how wide open our player in the fade position would have been. In our final clip, we get the inverse situation where the defenseman actually slides and our fade player is wide open. As this player sweeps across the top, he presses to the middle, which draws the adjacent slide, and this player's fade leaves him primed and ready to catch the ball and shoot the ball from about 12 yards. Now the final two-man game that we have, and the one that most people think of when they hear two-man game, and the one we're going to explain very in depth in our perfect pick set that's coming next, is the idea of a pick. And what a pick basically does is it puts two defensemen in a decision-making scenario that will hopefully slow them down. So an off-ball player is going to put himself in a position where a ball carrier can run his defenseman off of them, and this is going to either create space for the ball carrier to get inside and move towards the goal, or it's going to create space for the player who set the pick to roll or slip to the goal. Now we're going to overview that in depth in a minute, but for now there are 2 additional ideas that we may want to take advantage of as we're thinking through picks. So the first, and this is an idea that every single team that made the NCAA tournament used in some form this year as a primary way to attack the goal, is to use a big little. And big little is basically an explanation of the defensive players that we are pulling towards a pick. Big is a long pole, little is a short stick. And the idea is basically this. Long poles are usually the best defensive players who will play the best offensive players. And short sticks are usually the best short stick defensive players who will play the least good offensive players. So if we put those 2 defensive players in a picking scenario where they may switch, we could generate an opportunity where our best offensive player will be dodging against a less than great defensive player, because the majority of the best attackmen in the country can easily win a short stick defensive mini matchup. So by bringing a big little into a pick scenario, we are essentially making the decision of whether to switch or stay a more difficult thing for the defense, because they don't want to give up that short stick versus best attackman matchup. Here's what that looks like. If M2 here throws down to A2 and then moves in to come set a pick by going inside out, coming to set the pick, and now A2 catches the ball, dodges, and basically drives D2 off of this pick, what we're going to have is one of basically 2 things. If they decide to switch, A2 is now going to be in a scenario where, DM1 is now defending them, and he's going to be able to easily take advantage of that matchup. M2 will probably clear out, defended by D2. And now we're in a mirror scenario where we're probably going to get this slide from D2, and that's going to open up and push transition draw and dump style. The other thing that could happen is if M2 sets a really good pick that D2 loses a step to A2, now A2 is just going straight to the goal because DM1 didn't switch the matchup. We're going to use two clips to show you big little picks that generate good matchups in two different ways. The first way will show bringing a short stick to a long stick matchup that once we generate the switch, the player who was originally defended by the long stick will now have a short stick matchup that he can take advantage of. In the next example, we are going to bring a long stick matchup to a short stick matchup so that once those players switch, the long stick will be on the ball carrier and we can pass back to the good matchup that we want to exploit. In both clips, we're really going to see how by generating these matchups, we can really dictate how the defense needs to slide and react to us. In our first example, this player is going to dodge down the right side alley. As he does that, this player with a short stick matchup is going to pick his defenseman. Once this player generates the switch, he is now defended by a short stick, which he can easily take advantage of because he is used to being defended by poles. As he runs to X and starts his dodge, it's very clear that he can take advantage of this short stick matchup, as you can see with this terrific diving shovel shot goal. In this example, the ball carrier is already defended by a short stick, so once we set the pick and force them to switch, we're going to have to pass back to the short stick matchup. So as this player dodges off of a swing pick set by this player and they generate the switch, the ball is immediately passed back so they can take advantage of this matchup. Notice how this attackman, who is used to being defended by long sticks, can easily take advantage of this short stick matchup. He dodges up the right hash, steps away, and then pulls the matchup out again to re-dodge against it. He runs to X, rolls back, draws a slide, and finds a player cutting through the middle of the defense, and they score. Now the next picking tactic that we have is if a defensive team tries to lock off one of our players. That's going to create an even harder decision for the defensive players to make, because if a pick is set well, it's easily going to free up the ball carrier because the player who's on the picking player isn't going to switch off of them, and we know that. And so this is used a lot in the sub game where a player who is, say, a defensive midi or a pole goes to the top of the box to set a pick with a offensive midfielder on them, and a player will run off that pick trying to get the offensive midfielder to kind of play the pick, which will give the LSM time and space to run through the midfield line to either keep that offensive midfielder on the field or create a step advantage as they are subbing. As we let this clip run, this defenseman is on the offensive end. In order to sub him off, he's going to set a pick. As he sets the pick, the player defending him has to respect the fact that if he sets a good enough pick, the ball carrier is going to gain an advantage. As the ball carrier comes off the pick, the player hesitates for a second, and the pole gains a step advantage subbing through the midfield. One of the ways that I found was really cool that, as players are subbing and marrying to run off the field, that works really well is with our face-off middies. And TD Yearland did this great, and that's the clip I'm going to show you in a second. But so, if a face-off player wins a face-off, comes into the offensive end, and we are in our slow break scenario where, we're probing, but we're not really going to the goal, we may have a pick or something, and that's what they're going to do here. So TD Yearland essentially threw the ball down to an attackman on the wing, and now he went inside out to actually set an up pick on the defenseman. And what ended up happening was the attackman kind of pushed topside and then came underneath. And because the other face-off midfielder wasn't about to switch on to one of the best attackmen who he was playing, there was no switch. The pick was set well. The defenseman got caught up here, and then the attackman was able to get underneath and score. We begin this clip with a face-off. TD wins it clean and begins moving to the offensive end. As he enters the offensive end, he passes to the attackman and immediately moves to set a swing pick. There's no possible switch. He clips the defenseman relatively well and allows the attackman to get in underneath and score. Okay, so I have one more thing on the picking game that I want to show you, but it's not actually a two-man game. It's actually kind of a three-man game, but basically what it is rather than it being a pick and roll, kind of like we just covered, it's actually going to be a two-pass pick and roll. So if M2 has the ball up top, and we are going to get A2 actually moving inside out to set this pick here. M2 is going to come off of it, and as these players decide whether they're going to switch or not, basically A3 is going to move out, and M2 is immediately going to pass the ball down to A3, because A3 has a much better view of A2 and M2 who are coming off of this pick, so that if we do isolate D2 between these two players, now A3 has a very good view of M2 and A2 slipping to the goal. Whereas if we just did a pick and roll and M2 passed inside to A2, that's going to be a tough thing for him to catch, bring in, and then put on net. Whereas if he just throws it forward to A3, A3 has a great view of whether or not he wants to hit M2 on the give and go or A2 on this nation's look. In this clip, we get a great up pick from this attackman who ends up goal side as he's setting the pick. As the ball carrier comes off the pick, he immediately throws down to the player at X who has popped to get open. And now the picking player who is goal side has an advantage, and the player at X feeds him and we score.